This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Mariam Namazi. You're watching the NewsHour live from London. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, the White House says US President Donald Trump is receiving an experimental antibody cocktail after he and the First Lady test positive for coronavirus. As members of his inner circle are themselves tested, the president's election campaign events are postponed or moved online. Also coming up on the program, 6 days of fighting, dozens dead. But now, signs of compromise. Armenia's government says it's ready to discuss a ceasefire in Nagorno-Karabakh. And defiant protesters continue their calls for justice over the gang rape and deaths of 2 Dalit women in India. Welcome to the program. US President Donald Trump and his wife Melania are in isolation after testing positive for COVID-19. Displaying mild symptoms of the virus, a White House doctor has said that Trump received experimental antibodies and that he remains fatigued after the diagnosis. How long the president's isolation is set to last, well, that depends on how unwell he becomes. US health authorities say people must self-isolate for 10 days after a positive test, and even longer if they present symptoms. And even after that, Trump might have to test negative twice in a row, with those tests done at least 24 hours apart. The crucial question, how is this going to affect the election? Trump's campaign says all pre-announced events involving the first family will either be postponed or held online. It's not clear if Trump will be able to attend the next presidential debate, which is set to be held on the 15th of October. And of course, there's just weeks to go until Americans pick a new president in an election that's been defined by a coronavirus outbreak that's killed more than 207,000 people in the US. Well, Alan Fisher joins us live now from the White House. And so, Alan, there has been confusion and uncertainty, but any more information coming from the White House about the president's condition?
Well, certainly the update we got from the press secretary in the last hour was informative. It told us that, as you say, the president is fatigued but in good spirits. We are told that he's been conducting business from the residence, the building that you see behind me, where he is self-isolating. It's interesting that he was given these experimental antibodies because they haven't yet been given regulatory approval. So it's clearly something that they're doing to see if this will help his condition. And of course, the president will make a decision along with his doctors if any further treatment is needed. There is a big medical unit inside the building behind me. So if he were to deteriorate in any significant way, they could treat him here, and then if things got worse, they could move him to a hospital nearby. As for Joe Biden, well, he's been on the campaign trail in Michigan just in the last hour. He's made the point that this is not a political moment. This is a moment where people should be taking a view of an American moment, where people should work together. And he said this is a reminder that everyone really should be wearing masks. But there's absolutely no doubt, when we're often told that presidential elections have an October surprise, this was a surprise which has completely upended the presidential race. From the White House, the Chief of Staff says the president is showing symptoms but working normally.
I got the 5 or 6 things that he had tasked me to do, like I do every single morning.
He wouldn't confirm when they knew the president was at risk after a close aide, Hope Hicks, tested positive.
We discovered that right as the Marine One was taking off yesterday. We actually pulled some of the people that had been traveling and in close contact.
Democratic challenger Joe Biden stood on the same stage as the president on Tuesday. He's now been tested for the virus and is negative. He sent his best wishes, tweeting, "Jill and I send our thoughts to President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump for a swift recovery. We will continue to pray for the health and safety of the president and his family." Before his diagnosis, Trump phoned an American TV show and talked about having been exposed.
It's a tough kind of a situation. It's a terrible thing. So I just went for a test, and we'll see what happens. I mean, who knows?
Trump has several risk factors that put him in danger of complications from COVID-19. He's in his mid-70s and overweight.
We have to wait for the next few days. For the some people get really sick within hours, but some people don't get sick until a week after, and so we have to really be carefully observing the situation.
The president has not worn a mask often, including at his own rallies, where many of his supporters reject the science behind the idea. His team, including family members, went without masks at the debate on Tuesday. Trump even ridiculed Democratic candidate Joe Biden for wearing a mask, as recommended by virtually all public health experts.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi also sent her best wishes to the president, but said this was a lesson to be learned.
This is tragic. It's very sad. But it also is something that going into crowds, unmasked and all the rest, was sort of a brazen invitation for something like this to happen. It's sad that it did, but nonetheless hopeful that it will be a transition to a saner approach to what this virus is all about.
Now there's a question over how this impacts campaigning on both sides. The president is behind nationally and in certain key swing states. 2 weeks in self-quarantine won't help that. Trump joins other world leaders, including Brazil's president and the UK Prime Minister, who have contracted the virus. The White House says they expect him to make a full recovery.
And of course, Alan, this means that President Trump is going to be out of action, for at least a few weeks, just a month before the election itself. How could that impact his campaign, given, particularly with his supporters, they really rely on his speeches and his galvanizing presence?
It complicates things in a number of ways. First of all, Donald Trump was running on the idea that we were rounding the bend on COVID, that he gave a speech just a couple of hours before his positive diagnosis, saying that we were seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Clearly that argument has been smashed apart by what has happened to the president in the last 12, 18 hours or so. He was talking too about how the economy was improving. That becomes difficult. New job figures out in the last few hours suggest that not as many jobs have been added to the American economy as many independent analysts predicted, and certainly as the White House was hoping. So that makes things difficult as well. Getting out and about allows him to generate interest, to generate local media coverage, to generate money to his campaign, which has been struggling over recent months. If he can't go out and campaign, he needs to spend more money on TV advertising. They don't have that sort of money to do it in any huge scale, particularly in the States where Joe Biden is competitive, and in fact Joe Biden is in the lead. It's also difficult for the Republicans to swivel to a lot of virtual campaigning. It's not something they've been doing, not something they're terribly good at. The Democrats have been doing it for much longer with virtual town halls and meetings and fundraising, and so it's much easier for them to do it. Also, Joe Biden will now be a lot more high profile when he's on the campaign trail. He doesn't have to compete against the president's voice. Many people said that part of Hillary Clinton's problem was that she was drowned out by Donald Trump saying things. It didn't have to be anything exciting, but he said things that got a great deal of coverage 4 years ago, and that led to people seeing him on the air every single day. So for all of those reasons, this upends the election race. You've got to remember, when you look at the recent polls, Donald Trump is behind 8 points nationally. Forget the national polls, look at the state polls, and then in the states that are competitive, that are swing states, he is behind in a lot of those, and he really needed to start gaining ground. One way to do that is to be out and about. He simply won't be able to do that for the next 2 weeks. And then there is the overarching question of just how ill is Donald Trump. We know that the White House hasn't been fully transparent about health issues in the past with the president. Remember, he went to Walter Reed, the local hospital, a short time ago. As part of, the White House told us, the first part of his medical. He never took the second part, and there was speculation, which Donald Trump eventually had to talk about whether or not he'd had a mini stroke. He, of course, denied it. His doctor said that wasn't the case, but it left questions about how open the White House will be about the health of the 74-year-old president. One thing to point out, I've been here on the White House campus many times over the last few months, particularly since COVID became a huge thing. There are a lot more people who work in that building behind me wearing masks today than they have been in the last 6 months.
Thanks very much. From the White House, Alan Fisher. Meanwhile, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is campaigning in the swing state of Michigan, as we're hearing Alan just mention there. He says that Trump's infection is a reminder of how serious the pandemic is.
I would like to start by acknowledging, which I'm sure all of you do as well, sending my prayers for the health and safety of the First Lady and President of the United States after they tested positive for COVID-19. My wife Jill and I prayed that they'll make a quick and full recovery. This is not a matter of politics. It's a bracing reminder to all of us that we have to take this virus seriously.
And US voters have also been reacting to Trump's positive COVID-19 positive diagnosis with some split on whether it's going to impact the election.
I think one of his biggest sort of strategies was to make Joe Biden appear too weak to be president. And so if he's got coronavirus, that sort of takes that factor away. So I think it could potentially greatly impact the election and put things more in Biden's favor.
I'm surprised it didn't happen much earlier. He has not paid attention to the rules, and he's encouraged other people not to pay attention to the rules. So I hope it's a lesson.
I don't really think it'll impact the election that much. I don't think people will change their opinion because he has it now. I do worry that, although I hope he is well and he doesn't get sick, very sick, I think that I've already seen on Fox News today that they're saying like, oh, well, if he's 75 and he doesn't get severely ill, then maybe older people aren't as high risk as they think. So I'm hoping it doesn't take the negative effect and it actually gets better.
So what could happen if President Trump gets too sick to perform his presidential duties? Well, it could temporarily transfer power to the Vice President Mike Pence under the 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Pence has tested negative for the virus, but if he falls ill as well, the baton is then passed to Nancy Pelosi, the senior Democrat who is Speaker of the House of Representatives. If Trump dies or is too sick to stand in the election, the Republican Party will need to choose a new nominee. But early voting has already started and his name might still stay on the ballot. So I'm joined now by Daniel Freeman, former counsel and parliamentarian to the House Judiciary Committee and author of The House Was My Home, a book about his career on Capitol Hill. Can I just start by asking you, can you remember another time where you've seen events like this play out just weeks before an election?
No, this is absolutely astounding. Very unusual.
How do you think this is, it's likely to play out in the coming weeks? Because obviously President Trump is not going to be able to continue with campaigning. We know that events have been either postponed or moved online. How is that likely to impact his position in the race, given that he's already behind in the polls, not just nationally, but also in those crucial swing states?
Well, I learned a long time ago never to guess what politicians are going to do. I can tell you about what the options are. There's a lot of discussion about moving the election back. And that is very present in some of the press today. But that's not going to happen because all of the dates that are set for this electoral process are set by Congress. And it takes an act of Congress to change that. So the question is, what are the things that can happen and when? And that will govern what the result's going to be. If the president either dies or becomes incapacitated between now and November 3rd, the election day, the political parties will decide. The Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee would do the replacement. This has never happened with a presidential candidate, but it's happened 7 times with vice presidential candidates. And there's always the question of what do you do if the president dies and all of those ballots that people are voting early on contain his name. The second time frame is if a candidate becomes incapacitated or dies between the election of November 3rd and the Electoral College meeting in December 14th. Party rules would still apply. The replacement candidate would be named by the national party, or they could even reconvene a party convention. That's probably not very likely. The parties still control. So what happens if a candidate dies or becomes incapacitated between the Electoral College vote, which is December 14, and the inauguration on January 20th? Most scholars of this issue feel that the action of the Electoral College, those people in the state capitals who will be voting on December 14, that is the actual election. And we don't have to wait for the formal joint session of Congress to resolve who is going to be the president. If the vice president-elect, he would become the president-elect should the president-elect die. And the vice presidency would subsequently be filled under the 25th Amendment.
And so can I ask you, what can you give us a sense of what might be happening now behind the scenes? Because we know that with the coronavirus, obviously the president now has mild symptoms, but it's roughly day 10 of having the virus that symptoms can potentially become much more severe depending on how the virus plays out with the individual. Now, what sort of situation are we likely to see in terms of White House advisors being in touch with members of Congress who are also getting information from the team of doctors that are providing medical treatment for the president?
Well, this White House has not been very forthcoming with accurate information on a lot of fronts, and I know a lot of people are concerned that the American public will not get the truth about the president's condition. That being said, everybody is interested in what happens because it will affect America starting January 20th, one way or the other. Now, if no one qualifies as president or vice president by Inauguration Day, then
well,
actually,
Dr. Freeman, we're just getting some information now that President Trump is going to move to a special suite at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center for the next few days as a precautionary measure. So that suggests that he is now going to leave the White House. They are moving him to the Walter Reed Medical Facility, but it doesn't seem as though that is caused by any sudden change or deterioration in President Trump's medical condition. It appears to be more a precautionary measure, a preemptive move, so that if the situation deteriorates very quickly, if his condition takes a turn for the worse, that he is in a place where he can receive immediate care.
Well, certainly being at Walter Reed, which is an extraordinary medical facility, is better than being in the White House if you are potentially going to get worse. And nobody knows what's going to happen with that. And we could also have the situation where the president becomes incapable of performing his duties. And if he sends a notification to the Congress that he is incapacitated, then Mike Pence, the vice president, would become the acting president during that time of incapacity. And it would be up to the president then to notify the members of Congress that he was back in the saddle, as they say, and that he was now back being president, and then Mike Pence would go back to being vice president. But I can't, I'm not a very political person, but I cannot imagine anybody who's managing a Republican campaign, whether it's for president or down to dog catcher, is chuffed up by how this is playing out. This is not good news for people on the Republican side, that if the president's coattails are weak, because the president's election is weak, it could be a devastating landslide.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your thoughts, Daniel Freeman. Thanks for joining us. We can now go to Alan Fisher, because he's also monitoring the situation at the White House there. And of course, we just had this news that President Trump is being moved to a different facility. So has he now left the White House?
He hasn't. We had a suspicion that something was going on because here at the White House they have a thing called the travel pool. The travel pool covers all of the president's events, and when he leaves the building they go with him, and the travel pool was summoned, which suggested that the president was going to move, and the only reason we could think of at the moment he would be going anywhere, given that we were told he was fatigued but in good spirits, was to move to the hospital. As I said just 10 minutes or so ago, they have a very good medical facility right here at the White House. If there was a deterioration or they needed somewhere where they could treat him slightly more advanced very quickly, they would take him to the Walter Reed Memorial Hospital, which is about a 20-minute drive from here. Just standing here, I'm beginning to think, is that, am I hearing motorcycle engines revving up? I don't think it is. I think it's something elsewhere. But that would suggest that they were getting very close to moving the president. He has, of course, been to Walter Reed on a number of occasions to visit veterans who've come back from wars, who have been injured. But also, a short time ago, he was taken, and when I'm talking months here, where he went with medical notes in his hand, very surprisingly on a Saturday around March, to go to Walter Reed for what we were told at that point was the first stage of his annual medical, but he never took the second stage. We're now hearing in the distance, we can hear that there's a few sirens firing up. That would suggest that the president is on his way, and we should have pictures of that very shortly. When he gets to Walter Reed, there will be a team that have been put on standby waiting for the president. He will go straight into the treatment room. The doctors will take a very brief medical history. That's probably already been sent over. They will find out what his latest symptoms are, and then they will decide, along with the president and his physician here from the White House, on what the next step is going to be. I'm just getting a signal. Tell me what's happening.
Walter Reed.
He's gone to Walter Reed. It is confirmed. He's now on his way to Walter Reed Hospital. So this has developed quite significantly over the last 14 or so hours. You'll remember that it was just after 1 a.m. here in Washington that we were told that the president had tested positive after being exposed to a top-level aide, Hope Hicks, who had also tested positive for COVID. He went on Fox News on Thursday night to say that he'd had this exposure and that he was being given a test, and then we got the news just after 1 a.m. that test had proved positive. We're now hearing helicopters. I don't think for a minute that they would be taking him on Marine One, but that's the sound that we normally hear when the helicopter is to escort him. So that what is going to happen is that the helicopter will be in the air above the president. So if there's any problem, they can immediately carry him by helicopter. But he is going by road. We don't know if there's an ambulance here or whether he will go in his normal truck known as the Beast, or he will go in an SUV, which is of course what he did when he went to Walter Reed back in March. Clearly this is a surprising development, given that we were told less than an hour ago that he'd been treated with a combination of revolutionary new drugs which hadn't yet been given regulatory approval, as well as the usual things that he would get and vitamins to try and help his condition. But clearly, in consultation with his doctors, his condition has deteriorated to such a point that the doctors have decided the best thing for him is to move from the residence of the White House to Walter Reed, where they have instant medical expertise and some of the top best equipment that you can possibly buy right there on tap. So a surprising development, and interesting how this story has developed over the past 16 hours or so.
It is an interesting development, as you say, Alan, because it's important to remember that President Trump is going to have, he will have had at the White House, perhaps unlike many Americans that have to think carefully about their healthcare coverage and how much treatment they're able to get if they suffer any COVID-19 symptoms, he has access to the best possible care, the best possible monitoring. So it is surprising that he's being moved to this facility. And then also just some additional reports coming through now on the Reuters news agency, a source familiar with the matter saying that Trump has a mild fever, but that's not much more information than that. For now, we know that he's just been moved to the facility. We're being told by the White House this is as a precaution, essentially.
I suspect the phrase that we're going to hear a lot of over the next few hours is out of an abundance of caution. We were told that when he was at a fundraiser on Thursday night, he felt a bit tired, lacked a bit of energy, wasn't his usual self when interacting with the crowd at Bedminster, at his estate in New Jersey. He came back to the White House. He has been self-isolating since that point, although Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, was saying that he'd been in contact on the phone. I'm getting some more information.
He is traveling by helicopter.
He's traveling by helicopter, which would suggest that they want to get him to Walter Reed as quickly as possible. So they've called in Marine One, and he will be taken to the hospital, which of course, given the advanced state of the hospital, has its own helipad. The fact that they're moving him by helicopter would suggest that this is clearly a concern for the doctors. Now, if at any point they have to put him to sleep to carry out some treatment, if they have to intubate him, then at that point the 25th Amendment kicks in, and Mike Pence, who is the Vice President, will become the acting President. Mike Pence, of course, was tested for COVID earlier today. We are told that he does not display any symptoms. That test was negative. He had not been exposed to the same people that the President had been exposed to, and therefore was going to continue his role on the campaign trail, but also as Vice President without necessarily, he wouldn't need to see the President. He could talk to him on the phone, so there wouldn't be one-to-one interaction, and certainly that is something that they would have studiously avoided after the President's positive test. So he has been taken by helicopter to Walter Reed Hospital, just a short distance away from the White House there. There is a medical team on standby. I'm sure the media are already camped out in front of the hospital, and they will be carrying pictures as the President is taken to hospital. This will be a concern to many people across America. Of course, Donald Trump, he divides opinion quite markedly, but those who like Donald Trump tend to more than like him. They tend to love him, admire him. Many of them believe that he is the best president that America has ever had. So this will come as some shocking news, but it may also come as a wake-up call to many people who are his supporters, who have been very dismissive of the science around masks, even though public health experts have repeated on several occasions that this is one of the ways that they can try and cut the infection rate down. I'm just seeing we're getting more information coming in now. Let me just pop on my glasses. It's a statement from the press secretary. Let me just read it to you. It's been handed to me. President Trump remains in good spirits, has mild symptoms, and he's been working throughout the day. Out of an abundance of caution, and at the recommendation of his physician and medical experts, the President will be working from the presidential offices at Walter Reed for the next few days. President Trump appreciates the outpouring of support for both he and the First Lady. So there we are. We got the phrase, an abundance of caution. There is a presidential suite at Walter Reed. It is fully equipped for any president in the way you would expect it to be, with top-level communications. It is a secure location.
And actually, Alan, we're just looking at shots from outside that facility now. Well, okay, so we can see the helicopter just outside the White House, but as you say, we're waiting for the President to then be taken to the Walter Reed facility. And this after, of course, we've been told that he's going to be moved as a preemptive step, just as a precaution. Should he need any further medical treatment, he's going to be taken there. And of course, this is after his diagnosis for COVID-19 a little bit earlier. Well, Esther Chu joins us now, an emergency physician and professor at Oregon Health and Science University, joins us now from Portland by Skype. And there are some reports suggesting that the President is suffering from a light fever. This just less than 24 hours after we learned publicly of the COVID-19 infection. Is that somewhat surprising? I mean, would that suggest that perhaps the virus might have been infected with it prior to that?
Yeah, certainly we don't expect to see necessarily a positive test the first day that you have the virus. So it's possible that that we simply didn't hear about it, or that his test was not positive for any number of reasons, a false negative, or he didn't have a high enough viral inoculum to trigger the test. But a fever is concerning. I think what else is concerning is just every time that just the rapid escalation of his symptoms. We heard he was very energetic and in good spirits, and then we heard he was tired and lethargic, and now we're hearing about this fever, and then he's moving to the hospital. We did get some reassurance that it's just out of an abundance of caution, but it seems like there is a trajectory to the new information we're getting about him clinically, and it's more concerning every time we get more information.
So does that suggest that the virus is further along, that he's had it for more than just a few days?
It's hard to know. This still could be early and mild disease, and some people do manifest some cold or flu-like symptoms early on. But it does make us, need to watch very carefully and continue to, have a high level of concern, because certainly COVID is a disease where the second week, the period between 7 and 10 days, you can take a rapid turn for the worse. So we may anticipate that we still have a rocky road to go for his clinical course.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you say, it takes about a week for perhaps more serious symptoms to materialize, but we only learnt of the COVID-19 diagnosis 24 hours ago. And of course, the other issue is that the president hasn't disclosed any medical records. So there is very little we know officially about the state of his health. But based on his age and his sex alone, how vulnerable is he to more severe symptoms?
Yeah, we know he falls into several categories of people who tend to experience more severe symptoms of COVID and to need hospitalization. So his age, his obesity has been mentioned a lot. The fact that he's male, and there seems to be a male predominance in serious disease and hospitalization and ICU care and fatalities. And then of course he's had some mystery visits to Walter Reed in the past, where people speculated about what might have happened. And he's on a cholesterol-lowering agent, so we can assume that he has some coronary artery disease. And so he has more than one risk factor, but that's across a population. And how that plays out in an individual person, we never know. And as many people have said, he still is more likely than not to do okay. But as we hear of symptoms, of course, we worry that his risk factors are actually causing him to fall into a category of people who will go on to be more ill. The other possibility I wanted to mention is, he's taking this experimental monoclonal antibody treatment.
I was just going to ask you about that, actually. I'm so sorry. I'm just wondering, because we learnt about that from a White House doctor, and we also learnt that he remained fatigued after the diagnosis. But could this be some sort of side effect?
It absolutely could. And this is exactly the issue with taking an experimental drug where you have only a small number of patients to document the effectiveness and the potential side effects. And this kind of product does stimulate sometimes an immune response, which could include a fever and feeling fatigued or unwell or having shortness of breath. So there could be some confusion about whether or not he's having a reaction to this new treatment, or whether these are actually the symptoms of COVID. So there'll be some sorting out to do.
What are the possibilities for his prognosis from here on?
Well, what we hope is that he has some symptoms, but this is mild disease and he doesn't progress. He will need to probably, if they've decided that he needs this level of monitoring, he probably will need to stay there for a while through the period in which we would expect to see decline if it's going to happen. And then, time will declare either he will go down one path or another. So we just have to wait and see at this point.
When you say one path or another, how likely, just, based on what we know about we know that he's overweight, that he's obese. This doesn't bode well for the way in which the virus develops. You've said that. There is the factor of men tend to suffer from COVID-19 much more severely than women tend to do. And then also what's interesting is perhaps his lifestyle. Now, information about Donald Trump suggests that he doesn't sleep properly, he doesn't exercise very well, his diet isn't great, and also perhaps he has a tendency to lose his temper sometimes. How does this sort of lifestyle affect one's ability to fight the virus?
Everyone's a mixed bag of kind of risk and resilience factors. So like you mentioned, he has some things that, some comorbidities that put him at higher risk for progressing. He also has some positive things. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink alcohol. And also, importantly, he's extremely wealthy and privileged. So, he's someone who got a test early, who is surrounded by physicians, who's going to a world-class medical center, who already has gotten an early therapy and will get early therapies of every kind, even some that are not accessible to the average American. There's an argument that actually sometimes VIP patients can get too much, but he's certainly not going to want for any type of therapy, and he certainly will not experience any delay in receiving world-class care. And so that might offset some of his comorbidities and his age and other things that would otherwise predispose him to going down a riskier path. So I think he's really a balance of things that might incline him to doing worse, and then a balance of things that might privilege him to doing well. So it's kind of a flip of the coin.
As you say, it's important to take into account the fact that he does have access to experts, doctors, and the best medical treatment the country has to offer, and that would certainly improve his prospects for fighting off the virus. Thank you very much, Doctor. I hope we can chat to you a bit more about this. Appreciate your time for now. Meanwhile, Alan Fisher is still following developments for us from the White House. And Alan, we've been looking at this shot of the helicopter outside the White House waiting to take President Trump to the Walter Reed Medical Facility. Is this a live shot that we have here, or is it lifted off?
What's happening now is Mike left.
I think that's a live shot. Certainly the helicopter hasn't taken off, so I thought you were getting guidance from someone else. As you can see, the rotor blades haven't fired up, which suggests that they're waiting for the president to get on board. Just to break this down for a second, it's just after 1 a.m. we were told, so that is 16 hours ago. So just over 16 hours ago, we were told that the president had been treated for and had tested positive for COVID-19. He hasn't been, apart from a tweet just before that time, we haven't heard from the president at all, and now he's being airlifted to a medical hospital. This is a big deal. He's obviously going for tests, but there's obviously concern enough about the 74-year-old president that they want to get him to a secure medical hospital where they can carry out more extensive treatment and do so very quickly if they need be. So although people here at the White House have been playing it very cool and saying the president is in good spirits and he's feeling a bit fatigued, this is clearly a lot more than that, and there's clearly a concern that the president needs some immediate treatment that cannot be provided in the very specialised medical unit that exists here at the White House, which is why there is a helicopter waiting to take him to Walter Reed. Also interesting too that the helicopter was called. We were all expecting him to go by convoy. It would have taken about 20 minutes. By helicopter, once he gets on board, it will take about 5 minutes to fly to Walter Reed. He will be in that ward probably no more than 10 minutes after leaving here. So you can see that there is some degree of urgency when you're talking about the difference between 10 and 20 minutes and them trying to concertina those together. You can see just how significant, important and concerning this moment is for those around the president and the president himself. Here's another thing to consider. Donald Trump always likes to portray himself as very strong and very fit. You'll remember that 4 years ago he mocked Hillary Clinton because she had to go to hospital because she had pneumonia. She was only there for a day, but he made a great deal about it on the campaign trail. For him to admit that he needs help to such a degree that he has to go to hospital, has to be taken there quite urgently, shows that he is obviously in a great deal of discomfort and is greatly concerned about his own health, that in consultation with his doctors, he decided that Walter Reed, the military hospital, and the presidential unit there was a better option than self-isolating here at the White House.
All right, thank you very much, Alan Fisher. Also joining us now, political analyst Eric Ham. Eric, what are your initial thoughts in response to this news? Obviously, this comes after the president's positive diagnosis for COVID-19. He initially had mild symptoms. He's being treated with a cocktail of drugs. We were speaking to a medical professional earlier who said that actually a fever so early on in his diagnosis could be the result of some sort of side effects. Just how will people, the majority of the public there, be processing and digesting this news?
Well, when we first heard that the president had contracted the virus, there were a lot of questions around the situation. How would he be able to lead the government? How would he be able to handle his role as commander-in-chief? But also, how would he be able to continue to campaign for re-election? And I think now a lot of those questions were predicated on the president's health and how his body would be able to combat this virus. And now we're getting those questions answered. And clearly we're seeing a worsening of the president's conditioning, and it's worsening at a pretty rapid clip. I mean, we heard that the president around 1 a.m. our time was positive with the virus, and we were told that it was mild, he was in good spirits, but then we were told he had a fever, and now we're learning that not only was he taking an experimental drug, but he was taking it at the highest dose. And now we see the president is being airlifted to Walter Reed. And as your correspondent just said, it's only a 20-minute drive from the White House to Walter Reed. And the fact that they have to airlift him suggests that the situation is much worse than what the White House is letting on.
I was just going to ask you, actually, I was just going to ask you, Eric, what hearing this news, it wouldn't be the first time, would it, that what concerns do you have about the timing and the accuracy of the information that has been disclosed from by the White House about the president's condition?
Well, what it sounds like is that perhaps the president has been sicker much longer than perhaps we've even known, that he is worsening at such a rapid clip. But also, too, what are they going to do with Mike Pence? If we go back to last November, the president abruptly took a trip to Walter Reed, and many of us were not made aware of why the president took that trip. And we learned just recently that Mike Pence was told to be on standby because the president was going to go under some type of anesthesia. But now we're seeing that the president is heading over to Walter Reed. The question is, are they prepared to somehow invoke the vice president or to engage him in this whole issue? And so this is causing more questions. And now where the public need transparency as to what is in fact is going on with the president and how in fact his condition is, because it sounds like it's getting much, much worse.
So what's likely to be happening at the moment? Obviously, the priority is to airlift the president to the Walter Reed Medical Facility to get him out the White House into a different setting. But there'll be communication between White House advisors, doctors, and then when it comes to making that decision about transferring power temporarily to the vice president under the 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution now, how quickly could that be triggered?
Well, that could happen very quickly, very easily. And we also know that there will be a set of offices in the Walter Reed Medical Center for the president to work from. So I suspect this will operate very much in the same way that it did for Boris Johnson when he contracted the virus, that he will be working from the hospital and that he will have what he needs in the hospital to continue to govern, to continue to lead. But clearly, what we're seeing now is how quickly and how readily will the White House be willing and able to transfer that power to Mike Pence if the situation suggests that it's necessary to take place.
And what about obviously there isn't perhaps much thought being given to how quickly the president will be able to get onto the campaign trail. That's completely out of the question right now. Realistically, with just a month to go till the election, is this, are we likely to see much more of President Trump publicly, at least?
Well, we were being told earlier that much of the president's campaigning was going to move virtual. Again, just this morning, we were getting from the White House reporting that they were prepared to allow the president to work from the residence, and he would simply campaign virtually from the White House residence. Now the president is moving to the hospital, and so I suspect that this means there will be no campaign schedule for the president to have at this time. And so I think at this point, much of the president's apparatus will be in disarray. And again, we know that this is a very crucial time for the president because he was trailing Joe Biden. Joe Biden just gave a speech from the battleground state of Michigan, so he clearly is continuing to operate as the candidate seeking the highest office of the land. But right now, for the president, I think the concern is just to keep him alive.
All right, Eric, we'll catch up with you a bit later. Thanks very much. Just want to look at some live pictures now we're getting from the White House. Of course, the helicopter there waiting to take President Trump to the Walter Reed Medical Facility. Now, the White House saying that this is a precautionary measure should the president be in need of any emergency treatment. But obviously, there are concerns at this point about whether his condition has deteriorated, whether there's been a sudden change. A statement from the White House earlier said that the president remains in good spirits. It described his symptoms as being mild. They also made a point of saying in that statement that the president has been working throughout the day, and of course, particularly emphasizing this phrase that they're doing it out of abundance of caution, and this decision to take him to the Walter Reed Medical Facility out of the White House, this based on the recommendation of medical experts and the president's physician. The president, it says, will be working from the presidential offices at Walter Reed for the next few days, but obviously that will depend on how his condition develops, or indeed if it deteriorates. So maybe get a bit more on that now with Esther Chu, still standing by, emergency physician and professor at Oregon Health and Science University. Now, earlier on, there was a suggestion from sources familiar with the matter that the president might have a mild fever. And I know that you were saying that could be the result of a side effect of the cocktail of drugs he was taking that obviously hasn't been approved by the FDA. From what you know, Esther, of the president's basic stats, at this point, what would you say about the possibility of a prolonged hospitalization, possibly unconsciousness, and him possibly needing a ventilator?
It's so hard to say right now because we've really gotten a little information, and the information we've gotten has actually been confusing and sometimes in conflict with each other. I mean, we heard both energetic and lethargic in the same hour. I heard fatigued and fever, and then I heard that he's working all day. I mean, these things don't go together, and it's tremendously hard to paint a coherent clinical picture in my mind to figure out where he is in his disease course and how his symptoms are developing or waxing or waning, or if there really is a linear course to it that would indicate that he's on this trajectory to go worse and worse and worse. So right now, I would say all possibilities are still open. We had a few data points, including the fever and the fatigue, and then the escalation to hospital care that suggests that his clinical course is changing quickly and he is needing escalation of care. Obviously, my emergency medicine mind, which always considers the worst case scenario, is going to go there. But, they keep on using the word abundance of caution, which suggests that in ordinary times, were this not the president of the United States who is older and has some comorbidities, this might be something that the average person would continue to manage at home with just fever and symptom care. I mean, if you or I had a fever, we would take some Tylenol and ibuprofen and try to keep hydrated and see what happens. It might be that, were he not the leader of our country, that is simply what they're doing, but they've decided to monitor him more carefully. So I think either of those possibilities is completely on the table, and I'm interested to get even just a little bit more data to try to flush out this picture.
Yeah, it's important to say that there's a great deal that we don't know, and we are being given very little information by the White House, and the information that we are being given does contradict in places as well. And just from your experience working in the emergency ward, He has a mild fever. He has contracted the virus. When he arrives at Walter Reed, what will be the plan of action, the priorities for the medical team there in getting his treatment underway?
They probably, at the point that he's in the hospital, will, hook him up to the monitors, be checking things like his oxygen saturation to make sure that they are able to follow his breathing very well and detect really quickly if he has any compromise in his respiratory function. If they need to treat him with supplemental oxygen, that will happen right away. They will probably take an expanded battery of blood work, of blood tests. It's possible that he had some of those drawn already at the White House, but all we've heard of so far is the COVID PCR test itself. Once you go into the hospital, there is a broad panel of laboratories you tend to follow when you're concerned about the more advanced complications of COVID. And then it may be a lot of, kind of a flurry of activity and then a lot of waiting after that, and only letting time go by hour after hour will we see if those clinical parameters get worse. So I think it will be some monitoring and potentially some boredom for the president in the country overnight.
And I guess because we don't know whether this really is a precautionary measure or whether his condition has actually become worse, it's very difficult then to also assess the likelihood of him being admitted to an intensive care unit.
It is, and there's so many reasons for a president. When you're in that kind of role where you might feel actually pretty bad and get admitted to the hospital, whereas again the average person can feel terrible from COVID and terrible from influenza or other diseases, and we still send them home because they're stable. And we know that these are diseases that make people feel rough. And so simply feeling awful is certainly might be a reason to admit the president, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's unstable or that he's not going to do well. That is kind of what this disease does. So it may be that his symptoms are getting worse, but that when they check him out, all parameters look perfectly stable. So, there could be every reason to take him, and he may legitimately suffer from the virus, but it still might be okay.
Thank you very much, Esther Chu. I really appreciate your time and sharing your insight with us on this. It'll be good to talk to you a bit more later on, but for now, thanks very much. And of course, we've been looking at this live shot from the White House. We're waiting for President Donald Trump to be airlifted to the Walter Reed Medical Facility. Interesting to note that this facility is just a 20-minute drive from the White House. So the fact that the president is being airlifted suggests that his condition could be deteriorating, but the message from the White House is that there is no sudden change in his condition. They are keen to emphasize that it is just a precautionary measure, an abundance of caution, they say. A statement released a little bit earlier said that the president remains in good spirits and that he has mild symptoms. But what's interesting is that we're also learning, with some reports suggesting he has a mild fever. Now, that coming some 24 hours after the public disclosure of the president's COVID-19 diagnosis. So perhaps some conflicting information there from the White House, but we don't have a great deal of information. We don't have much more detail than that on the precise nature of the president's condition, whether it has suddenly changed. For now, they're suggesting that he is just being moved to the medical facility so that he can be treated, he can be in a setting where he can receive perhaps more specialist treatment than he would otherwise have access to should his condition change or deteriorate in some way. And of course, Alan Fisher is still with us. Hi, Alan. And so what do we know about the expertise and the treatment that President Trump has access to inside the White House?
Well, he has his own physician who he sees almost every single day, and certainly if the president has any concerns, he has immediate access to him. Inside the White House itself, there is a much more complex medical center where they can diagnose quite a lot of things, but they can also treat a lot of things that would normally you and I would need to go to hospital for. They can do that here on the campus. The fact that the helicopter is now waiting to take him to Walter Reed suggests that there is concern there. They want to tap into the expertise of the doctors there, that if he needs anything which is significantly more complicated that can be provided here. It can be provided in an instant, and they don't have to wait 20, 30 minutes to get a motorcade together or to get a helicopter here so they can take him away. So it's an indication of how serious this situation is, that they want to move him to the hospital as quickly as possible, but also a sign perhaps of how ill Donald Trump is feeling, that he's agreed to be taken by helicopter to Walter Reed. What will be important to watch is how he gets into the helicopter. It's small things like that will give us an indication of exactly how he's feeling. We are told he is fatigued. Remember, he is 74. He's had a very busy schedule because he's been campaigning for re-election. He was in Bedminster in New Jersey on Thursday night as he attended a fundraiser, and so didn't get back to the White House till around 1 o'clock. He works long hours, and that, or certainly he's awake for long hours, and that takes its toll on anyone, but particularly if you're 74, and then if you add into that you are not feeling at your absolute best. Remember, the president has also been taking the controversial drug hydroxychloroquine, which many people have criticised as not being effective, but he said he'd been taking it and he felt well. He actually believed that it was keeping COVID away, but as we know, he was exposed to someone who had a positive test. That someone was Hope Hicks, who is one of his closest advisors, someone who's always in and around his orbit. And then the president was tested after she had tested positive, and that is when it was discovered that he too had COVID-19. People are trying to go back to find out just how far this goes back. You remember on Saturday he had a big event here at the White House where he unveiled his pick for the Supreme Court, the woman who was going to get the nomination. Of the people who attended there, we know that at least two senior people, the president of Notre Dame University, where Amy Coney Barrett used to go and graduated, and also Mike Lee, who is a Republican senator, big fan of Donald Trump's. Both of them have, in the last 24 hours, confirmed that they too have been diagnosed with COVID. So let me give you an idea of where that helicopter is sitting. This is the White House. That is the residence. To my right is the West Wing, which also includes the Oval Office. Normally, if the president is in the Oval Office, there is a Marine who stands in full dress uniform in front of the building. There has been no one there throughout the course of the day because, of course, the president, we are told, has been self-isolating in the residence itself. This is the North Lawn. This looks out onto Pennsylvania Avenue, which, of course, is the very famous address for the White House. On the other side of the White House is the South Lawn. That is where the Republican National Convention took place, or large parts of it, where the president gave his speech accepting the nomination of the Republican Party to go forward into the election on November the 3rd. And that is often where the president leaves when he leaves by helicopter, and it's where that helicopter is sitting at the moment. That backs onto Constitution Avenue and the Washington Monument and the Mall area, which stretches, of course, from Congress all the way through the Washington Monument and down to the Lincoln Memorial. So that is where that helicopter is sitting at the moment. The staff there, highly trained. They are Air Force officers. Normally the pilot is rank of colonel or higher, and they will be waiting for the go-ahead from the president, who gives the order for them to take off, and also from his doctors. It will be interesting to see as well who is with the president when he makes his way to the helicopter. We are being told that the First Lady, who also tested positive, only has minor symptoms, and so it would be better for her health and for those who could be exposed to her that she stays in the White House. But given that she is the First Lady of the President of the United States, she may well want to accompany her husband. Also a factor in that will be just how ill the president is, because she may not want to leave him if there is a concern about his health. The president will then be taking the 10 minutes to Bethesda, which just laps into Maryland. That is where the Walter Reed Hospital is. The campus there is a big campus, but there is a fence all around. It is a secure area, somewhere that Secret Service can easily ensure the security and safety. And in that building, there is a presidential suite which has state-of-the-art communications where there can be accommodation for members of the family who want to be near the president. But it means that the president can continue to keep working if that is what he is able to do, if that is what he wants to do. So that is where we are at the moment, and we are just waiting for that helicopter to start up its engines. I think I'm beginning to hear, it sounds as if a helicopter is beginning to fire up its engines, but we're not seeing that at the moment. What we're seeing and what we're hearing are two separate things. It may just be that they are running through some checks, making sure that everything is okay before they fire up the rotors and take that short journey across the Washington skyline towards Bethesda and Walter Reed Hospital.
Oh, well, thanks very much. Alan Fisher at the White House.